Okay, let's go. First on the homeworks, been written by several people about they did really well on all the other problems and we just happened to choose the one that they didn't do very well. And you're not alone, there were many of you. I'm going to treat it as a learning experience. So I explained the first day, this is high risk, I can't grade them all, I want you to send you the homeworks. So you're going to need to come to office hours, you're going to need to get started early. If it's night before, it's going to be tough if I get 300 emails, how do I do this, how do I do that, I'm not going to answer them all. So it'll be up to you to get started early, to get the help you need, and do a good job on homework. And if you leave one blank, and there's 5 questions, you're running a 20% chance of getting a 0, and there's nothing I can do about that. What I'm going to do on the first one, since it was a learning experience, is if that happened to you, you got a 0, a really low score, if at the end of the course you're within a point or 2 of the next grade, come see me. I'll look at your homework, so I'll be able to tell from then on you did a good job and all of that, and then we'll talk about what to do at that point. And so, give you some break on that. If somewhere during the quarter this happens to you, come, and you're 1 point away, come see me. We can take a little bit of that risk away if you're within the border. But if you're taking this time after time and I see a bunch of 0s or a bunch of low scores, it's going to be much harder to think that every week after week you're putting the effort you need to put in to figure out how to do the homeworks. So that's how I'm going to handle this one, and I hope that works for everyone. It's the best I can do. There will be variance in these. I mean, everyone will have some variance because I think these are the ones we'll pick our ones. This next homework, which we'll post later today, will be due next Tuesday. Have some 2 easy ones, 2 or 3 really easy ones, and 2 or 3 that aren't quite as easy. And so it'll depend on which one gets picked if you take that chance. But anyway, sometimes you'll get lucky the other way. You pick the right one, the only one you did. And so there were some people who got lucky on the other direction, and so I also don't want to truncate the risk just on one side. So anyway, the other thing is, I've got the full video last time. I can get it into Movie Maker. When I tried to save it, it's crashed my computer 5 times, so I'm still trying. I'm trying a lower resolution save this time, but I'm having trouble with the video discourse more than I've ever had before. I don't know why, but we'll get those going. I'm leaving again this weekend, so I got another conference thing, so Thursday might be a little late again, but I'll get these. I don't know what's going on with this. I'll get it fixed. I've got all the raw files. They're fine, so if I have to reprocess the raw files, I will. I'm dropping PowerPoint entirely, starting today because it was too cumbersome. Hey, they actually have chalk today. I brought my own because I'm tired of running out of chalk. Okay, so let's get started. Where we ended last time was basically, and I know Evan went a little bit forward with this, but I want to just retrace steps a little bit. So where we ended last time I was here was with the financial market, the money market equilibrium. And it looks something like this, that money supply, M, equals money demand. Now we're just going to call money supply M. So money supply equals money demand. So this side was money demand. It depended positively on prices and incomes. If they go up, money demand goes up. And it depends negatively on the interest rate because of the opportunity cost. So when the interest rate goes up, the rate of return on alternative financial assets like bonds is higher. And so we expect people to move some of their wealth from money into financial assets as the interest rate goes up.
What does L represent?
The L rate is, this is a function. So it represents liquidity preference.
Do you think you can manipulate labels?
So this is, as I explained last time, this is liquidity preference. But it's just, it's an old symbol. I don't want to get lost in liquidity preference because that's an old Keynes term that he used to describe money demand. This is just a money demand function. And this is just a negative function of I.
Okay.
So when I goes up, L of I goes down. And that's just capturing the opportunity cost. So this is capturing the transactions demand for money. It's saying, you know, when the stuff costs more, you carry more money. When you buy more stuff, you carry more money. And this is capturing the opportunity cost. This is really the store of wealth function. This is our allocation of wealth between money or bonds. So this money has a store of wealth function. So you can use money to store your wealth. You can also use money to buy stuff, and that's transactions demand. So this is mostly picking up the transactions part, and this is mostly picking up the wealth allocation part of money demand. A specific example of LOI might be something like H0 minus H1I. It's just some negative function of the interest rate. Then you got PY times all of that, then you got your money demand function. And then we graph this thing. So okay, here's money supply, M. So we have M on this axis, and I on this axis. We put the money demand curve here. So this is the point, the equilibrium. That's how the interest rate is determined, where money supply equals money demand. So that's the equilibrium in this economy, in this market, in the money market. Interest rates, what you pay to borrow money, is the price of money. So this is just the equilibrium price of money. If you're down here and demand exceeds supply, what happens to prices? When demand is bigger than supply, price goes up. So the price of money would go up. If you were up here, supply would be greater than demand. So the price would go down, so this is an equilibrium. You'd be pushed to that point by market forces. And they're just the same old ones about supply and demand. Just think of I as the price of money. Now I'll come up with another way that we can see how this works from the bond market later on, because there's a relationship between the money and bond markets. So what we ended with was this. And now I just want to look at what happens to that diagram, what happens to the equilibrium if one of these variables, P or Y or M, changes. So a change in P or Y is going to shift the curve out, and a change in M will shift this curve. So let's just do those exercises real quick and tell the stories. So now we're asking, how does the interest rate change if one of those variables change? Show me graphically, tell me the story. Tell me the intuition. So the money supply is easy. You have M here, and the interest rate here. Here's M0, P0, Y0, L of I. So we're going to think about changing. These are all exogenous in these models. So these are the data that come in. So P is held fixed in this model, Y is held fixed, and then I adjusts to the equilibrium. We can change one of these pieces of data to see what happens, what the endogenous response is. So if we increase the money supply, you all know what happens. The interest rate falls, unless you're in a liquidity trap, which we haven't talked about yet. This thing eventually gets very flat. So when you increase the money supply, you can eventually hit an interest rate of 0 like we're at now. And if you're increasing the money supply out here, you're not going to change the interest rate. So right now, we're out here somewhere, in essence, because the interest rate's basically 0. The policy interest rate. And so if you increase the money supply anymore, it just doesn't have any effect on those things, because you've already hit. That's what's called the zero bound. You've heard about the zero bound, that's it. But normally, an increase in the money supply, an increase in the supply of something would lower the interest. So the story here is when the money supply goes up, money supply is greater than money demand, right? At the same interest rate. At this interest rate, now money supply is greater than money demand. So what people will do is they'll use the extra money to buy bonds. Because remember, in the background, we have this idea that wealth is distributed between money and bonds. What the interest rate's doing is giving us this split between the money and bonds. And P and Y too. So the money demand, that's how much of this wealth you have is in this liquid form. L is liquid money. That's why it's L. So that's how much of your wealth is held in a liquid asset, money. So that's why you call it liquidity preference. It's a preference for highly liquid as opposed to an illiquid, less liquid asset. So the interest rate determines that liquidity preference. So you have more money than you want to be holding. Money supply is greater than money demand. So you're holding more than you want. So you'll take some of that and you'll buy bonds. So that what will happen is that'll cause the price of bonds to go up. And I'll show you in a few minutes that the price of bonds and the interest rate have to be inversely related. So when the price of bonds goes up, the interest rate goes down. I haven't explained this part yet, but that's the basic intuition that drives the interest rate down. So the money supply goes up, you're suddenly holding more money than you want because the interest rate hasn't changed yet. At that interest rate, you're holding more money than you want to be holding. So you try to get rid of it by buying bonds. Demand for bonds goes up, so the price of bonds goes up. Got that arrow, and the interest rate goes down. I haven't shown you that, but I'll show you that in a second. Got that? So it's just a reallocation. You're trying to take some of your money and put it in bonds. Okay.
So everything you just talked about just now, that was relative to that.
That's this story.
Okay.
So you start here, this shifts out. At the same interest rate, suddenly money supply is greater than money demand. Because if that line is not there, money supply would be greater than money demand. So that's the new situation you're in at the old interest rate. So you have more money than you want to be holding. So you take that money and you dump it into financial assets. That makes the price of bonds and the interest rate change until it brings us back into equilibrium. Let's do another one. This is for P or Y going up. Either one. It's not going to make any difference. So we start off M0, P0, Y0, L of I. So the I adjusts to the data to give us the initial interest rate of the money supply, M0. Sorry, I guess the zero really ought to go down there. Technically, I forgot to bring coffee today. Got it. I looked up in my office and it was like 13 minutes to class. Get there. I'll just use that one, but it ought to be obvious that this change is the same. So suppose now it goes up, P1, Y0, L1. We can see that in this case, the interest rate goes up. And it's just the opposite story. Money demand goes up, price goes up, right? It's just the opposite. P or Y go up. That causes money demand to go up. So money demand is greater than money supply at the old interest rate, right? So at the old interest rate, supply is greater than demand. Oh, I'm sorry, I had it right. This is the old interest rate. We shift it out there. So money supply is less, money demand is greater than money supply, right? Sorry. This is the old interest rate. So at the old interest rate, money demand is greater than money supply. So now we need to sell some of our financial assets. Yes.
What's Y?
Y is income. Income or output. So your income goes up, so you're going to buy more stuff, so you need more money. So money demand goes up. So money demand is greater than money supply. You don't have as much money as you want. So what you do there is you sell financial assets. You sell financial assets to get more money. You do the opposite. Now you want to turn bonds into money or other things you're holding because you're not holding enough. Now you're selling bonds. What happens to the price of bonds? So everyone's trying to get rid of them. That drives the price of bonds down. And that's the same as saying the interest rate. So let me show you, it's hard to read. Let me show you this. So if you can't read my writing, just raise your hand because I know sometimes it's really bad, and so just stop me and say, what does that word say? So you sell financial assets to get more money because money demand is greater than money supply. So the price of bonds goes down. You open them. Everyone's trying to sell. And then the interest rate goes up. What I need is a better eraser. So now, while the price of bonds and the interest rate are negatively related, two different ways to motivate this and kind of figure out which one's going to be more intuitive. Let's do the yield approach. No, I'll do the other one too. Let's do both. Whatever works for you. The yield on an asset is going to be, so let's suppose, let me back up for just 1 second here. So there's a bond, and the way the bond works is you buy it today. There's different kinds of bonds, but this is how the one we're going to look at is going to work. So there's a bond you buy today, and you pay PB. Yeah, that's the right symbol. In 1 year, you get $100. So you might pay 90, and then you're going to get 100. Then we can calculate the yield that you'll get. So the percentage increase that you would realize during the year would be that 100 minus the price of the bond over the price of the bond. So relative to what you paid for it, that's the yield that you would get. So if you paid 90 and made $10 then, this would be 1/9, 10 over 9. So it would be an 11% yield. By 1 over 1. So this gives you the percentage term, which is what an interest rate is, your gain. This is a percentage gain relative to what you paid for. That's the yield on an asset. You see that? One of your problems is as simple as calculate the yields. All right. after some algebra, and I'll do that in a moment, but I don't want to get lost in the algebra. The price of a bond will be 100 over 1 plus the interest rate. So that's just solve this equation for PD. That's it. Nice collapse. Solve that for PD. Now it should be obvious that when the interest rate goes up, PD goes down. Right? As that gets bigger and bigger, that gets smaller and smaller.
So you called that one the yield approach, you call this one?
This is the present value.
Okay.
So this is simply the present value of that income stream. So some of you had other courses where it's just, the return at I over 1 plus the interest rate, or J to the J power from J plus 1 to N, and then you can add scrap value and all sorts of things. It's still the case that as the interest rate goes up, the price of the asset, the present value, which is the price of the asset, is going to go down. So I'm just using the simplest formula I can, but you can complicate this however you like, and the result will carry through. Another way to get this formula, well, you can also see here that as the price of bond goes, say, from 90 to 100, what happens to the yield? It's going to go down to 0. And this is 100, it's 0. You can even have negative yields. So as this keeps getting bigger and bigger, this keeps getting smaller and smaller. So there's a negative relationship between those two variables. So that's why at the end of each of those things, I would say, well, the price of bonds goes up, we know the interest rate had to go on in. Another way to do this is to say, suppose you get $100 a year from now. The price of the bond times 1 plus the interest rate ought to give you $100. So if I invest a certain amount at I get my principal back PD plus the return on IPD. So the price I have to pay is can be determined by this formula. If I promise you $100 in the future and the interest rate's 10%, this is what it's worth to you today. This is what you'd be willing to pay for that today. If the interest rate's 10%, let me make this 110 just for this example. If the interest rate was 10%, you'd be willing to pay $100 for that promise. Because you could invest $100 at 10% for the year, and you'd have $110 at the end of the year. So you can look at the formula that way too, and then you can say, okay, well, the price of the bond is 110 over 1 plus the interest rate. In this case, it'd be 100. The market price of this asset at a 10% rate of return, with a promise to pay 110, the price would be 100. Arbitrage would force it. But this is what we're interested in. So. Good enough. All right. Now, the book at this point goes into some things that I didn't think were very helpful at all. Let me do one more. So remember, you have that wealth equals money plus bonds. So you have this, these two markets. So here's the bond market. Here's the quantity of bonds and the price of bonds. And just like always, there's a demand for bonds, and a supply of bonds. The price is lower, you want more of them because the yield's higher, blah, blah, blah. So here's the equilibrium price of bonds. And over here we have the money market, M, I, and then money demand. So here's money supply, and here's money demand, P, Y, L, I. Y'all see it? Yes, Now, if price goes up, so here's the interest rate when you start. I'm sorry, let me change. I got to do the supply of bonds at a point in time is fixed. I'm sorry. What will happen here is at the old interest rate, demand will be greater than supply, right? Demand is greater than supply. So people need to get more money. How are they going to get it? They're going to sell, they're going to dump their financial assets. The demand for bonds is going to go down. That's going to drive the price of bonds down. At the same time, the interest rate's going to go up. In the end, the interest, you don't change M and B. This is applying to bonds. But as people try to get more money by selling their bonds, when the demand for bonds falls, the demand for money goes up, the interest rate goes up until the old M and the old B work. But basically, that's what's going on in the two markets. Not sure I said that very well. So this is P1YL. So we're at this interest rate I0, and demand goes up. The demand for money is bigger than the supply. So people want more money. At the same time, you can show that we haven't worked out the demand for bonds, but the demand for bonds would shift in. So people would want less bonds. So what they're trying to do is sell their bonds to get more money. They're trying to move from here to here. Now they can't actually, in the end, they can't get more because the bond supply and the money supply is fixed. So the prices have to move until they're convinced they want to hold that amount of bonds again, or money again. So what happens is the interest rate starts going up, and as it goes up, money demand goes down. And then eventually it's that point where they're satisfied with the money supply that's out there. So the money demand goes up because price goes up, then the interest rate goes up to bring money demand back to where it was. Because the supply is fixed. So in the end, they don't change their holdings. Just the demand changed, and then the prices had to change to make sure that they could keep the same, the demand equals supply. See that? The next thing in the book is to figure out how is M determined. And this is where they bring in the banking sector. And as I was just starting to say before, I thought I should try to do this graphically and maybe take these things more than okay. The book at this point tries to build a money multiplier model, and I think the whole discussion is more difficult than it needs to be. It's a bit confusing. It leaves out one of the most important things we need to talk about, the financial crisis, which is excess reserves. So I found the whole discussion rather unhelpful, and there's not much in it that we're going to need for later. So what I'm going to do is just skip pages 73 to 81, and put that in today's thingy. And just sort of talk about it more generally. There's something else I wanted to do first. I'll fit that in later. All right. What they work out is a formula that says the money supply is the money multiplier. Do you remember this in principles? Times what they call H. H means high-powered money. Sometimes it's called outside money. But what it is it's currency plus reserves. So it's the currency in the system plus reserves, bank reserves. That's the money sitting in banks. So what we call high-powered money is just currency plus reserves. This is some number that we think is probably most of the time, in regular times, bigger than 1. And in regular times, maybe it's even fairly stable. And so this is what the Fed controls. They can control the amount of currency that's out there. They print it. They take it out of circulation. It's a little bit more complicated because some gets underground markets and things. It's not perfect control. It's pretty good. And they can certainly control precisely the amount of bank reserves that are out there. So they have a really good control over the monetary base. They don't necessarily control the split between these very well, but they can control that total fairly precisely. So if the money multiplier is stable, like a number like 1.5 or something, or 2, you can control the money supply fairly precisely simply by manipulating H. And this is what open market operations controls. Open market operations change R. So when the Fed buys or sells bonds from the public, they're changing the amount of bank reserves in the system. That then changes the money supply. Now, the problem with this approach is that that multiplier isn't a very stable number. What happened during the crisis, for instance, is that this multiplier, I'm not going to work it out because the book doesn't even have this in it, but when excess reserves go up, the multiplier goes down. If money gets stuck in banks, this comes from, if you give banks another $100, they'll loan that out, okay? And someone will spend that money and go to a store. That store owner will put it in their checking account. They've hold some required reserves against that, say 10%, but they can loan the other 90 out. So, let the Fed buys a $100 T-bill from the public. Okay, so just imagine they buy a $100 T-bill from the public. So they give someone cash for that. They printed $100 in the basement of the Fed. They go out and they say, "Give me your T-bill. Here's 100 brand new dollars." Now let's just not worry about currency holding. Let's just make it 0 for the moment. So people don't hold any currency. So the person doesn't want any currency in their store. So they probably have some currency will come in. And so they just take that, put it in their checking account. So that causes the person puts money in checking account. So the change in demand deposits right now is $100. Demand deposits are checking accounts. So what's happened is you simply buy this asset from the public, you give them $100 and they just go put it in their checking account. No one's holding any currency. Now the bank has to put part of that in the vault, and the rest can go to loans. If the reserve requirement is 10%, So there's these things called reserve requirements. The Fed, if you put money in a checking account, $1 in a checking account, approximately 10 cents they have to hold in the safe or on deposit with the Fed, with the Federal Reserve. So the reserve requirement here is 10, if it was 10%, you put $10 into the vault and your loans would go up by 90. Someone would take that $90 and they'd spend it, right? In some store. You with me? So they spend it. They go out, buy something for $90. And what's the store owner do with the money? Puts it back in the bank. So the store owner, and it doesn't have to be the same store, puts the 90 into checking. So the change in demand deposits here is 90. What's the bank do next? It has to take 10% of that. So of that $90, $9 goes into reserve, and 81 goes into loans, right? And that's eventually, through the same process, going to cause a change in demand deposits of 81. Now, since the money supply is currency plus demand deposits, that's what we call M1. The change in the money supply, we just add up all the change in demand deposits. So, to get the change in the money supply, we can just add up all the changes in the demand deposits. So what have they been so far? Can I erase this side? So the change in demand deposits so far is that 100 plus the 90 plus the 81, and it just keeps going on. So the total change in the money supply will be bigger than the open market operation. This is the change in reserves is 100. The change in the money supply in this case would be 1,000. If I added all those up, it turns out it's 1,000. So the multiplier here would be 10. If I'm looking at that formula that says the change in the money supply is the multiplier times the change in H. That's the change in reserves in this case. Reserves went up by 100. So if this is 100 and that's 1,000, this has to be 10. So this would have a multiplier of 10 in this case. Did you follow that? I'm hoping you did some principles, and this is just racking here, bringing things back. So what would happen to the total change in the money supply if instead of holding 10%, banks held 20% each time? What would this number change to? 80. This number would be 64. Yeah, it's only 20%. So each piece would be smaller. So what would the total change in the money supply be? Smaller. And we add all these up. If we now have $1.100 plus $1.80 plus $1.64, it's less every step. So the total sum is less. So the multiplier must be smaller. So all I was trying to show you was that as banks put more of their money in the safe instead of lending it out, the multiplier gets smaller. What happened during the crisis, so what I was just trying to say is that we have this formula that says the money supply is the multiplier, the money multiplier, times H, or the change in M is that times the change in H. We could say that too, so I was using here. When excess When the Fed holds more than they're required, so they're required to hold 10%, let's say they can't loan the money out because you're in a big recession, so they hold 20, 30, 40% instead, what's the money multiplier do? It goes down. So when there's excess reserves, when they hold more than required, the multiplier goes down. So what happened during the crisis was the Fed was pumping a bunch of money in the economy. At the same time, the banks weren't loaning it out because no one wanted to loan it out. So we have a huge amount of money piled up inside banks. Excess reserves right now. I wish I had the graph. There's a huge spike when the crisis hit in excess reserves. So banks are sitting on a huge, huge pile of money, far, 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 far more than they're required to hold. If you look at the money supply figures, they didn't change very much. Because that's why we haven't seen a lot of inflation and other sorts of things. As the Fed tried to pump up reserves, the multiplier crashed and the money supply didn't go up like they wanted. So it's actually not that easy in a recession to change MS if you're having trouble figuring out how the multiplier is going to change. Or if all the money's just going into excess reserves and none of it's getting lent out. Suppose the first person puts demand deposits in there and then they don't loan any of it out. Well, then the change in the money supply is just equal to the change in reserves. You don't get a very big shock at all. And so if you did the open market operation with a bank, so suppose a bank is holding the financial asset. So this is how they did a lot of it. And you buy a T-bill from a bank and give the bank $100. And they don't loan any of it out. The money supply doesn't change at all. Well, reserves. So you don't get a very big change in the money supply if the banks aren't lending the money out. And so controlling the money supply is not quite as easy. And this isn't a very stable number. It changes on you unpredictably in recessions and even during good times. And that's one of the reasons why the Fed no longer targets the money supply. Instead, they target the interest rate, and M is whatever M needs to be to get that target interest rate. So, at the end here, I'll tell you what I want you to know from all this. But you don't know what's going to be yet, so it'll just be a summary. So we stop already. Totally forgot. Yes, thank you. It's right here. So we've been treating the money market as though M is exogenous, as though this is what the Fed controls. And as the Fed changes the money supply, so this is the exogenous change, the interest rate adjusts as it needs to adjust, up or down, in response. So this is the endogenous variable, and this is the exogenous. Under this model, this is what the Fed controls. And the interest rate just adjusts when the Fed changes the money supply. But it turns out the money supply is sort of hard to control. There's other reasons for this too. That you take 470 next quarter, and I'll talk all about this in more detail. But, anyway, so the money supply isn't as easy to control. They can't necessarily hit this target if they want to. It's hard to hit it. It's much easier to hit an interest rate target. So what the Fed does these days, for the most part, is target an interest rate. So you hear them when they come out of the meetings, they don't say, we want the money stock to be this many trillion. They say, we want the interest rate to be 0.25 or 1.0 or 5.25. So they're targeting an interest rate. And the way they do that is, here's the money supply, here's P, Y, L, I, and this is their interest rate target. So this is, they came out of a meeting, they said, we want the interest rate to be 2%, so the interest rate is sitting at their target rate of 2%. Now if there's any disturbance, say that prices go up unexpectedly, so the interest rate goes off target, what they'll do, should they sell bonds or buy bonds here to make the interest rate go down? They need to get the interest rate back to that point. What's the money supply have to do? It has to go up, so they have to buy bonds. Take bonds from people and give them newly created money, right? Reserves. So what the Fed would do is say, our target's 2%, and they're watching the markets, and the interest rate starts drifting up to 2.5. As it starts to drift up, they'll just start doing open market operations, and they'll keep doing them until the interest rate comes back down to its target. So they'll just start increasing the money supply. They may not know exactly how much it's going to take. All they have to do is watch the interest rate, because it adjusts pretty fast. And eventually, as they keep moving the money supply out, they'll get back to their old interest rate. But notice that now this is the endogenous variable. This is the thing they're choosing, and this is the thing that adjusts to clear the market. So the way it works now, in the old days when they used to build these models, they assumed the Fed controlled the money supply, and the interest rate was the thing that adjusts to clear the markets. Now what they do is they set an interest rate and they adjust M until they get the interest rate they want. So M is essentially the clearing thing, the thing that moves to clear to keep the target. And so the Fed controls interest rates rather than money supply these days. And then the money supply is whatever it needs to be. They really don't care what M is. It's not a target. They don't ever talk about it. M is simply whatever it needs to be to hit their interest rate target. They do sort of talk about it. That's quantitative easing. It's the size of the balance sheet. But, that's a little bit. That's a different thing. So here, they come out of a meeting and they say we should increase the money stock from 200 billion to 300 billion. And the interest rate adjusts to whatever. They don't care. That's not a target. Here, you adjust M, you don't care what it is to hit the thing you chose. It flips what's endogenous and what's exogenous. So I'd like you to know how the Fed changes the money supply. So if the Fed wants M to go up to hit an interest rate target, or just because it's the target for any reason, do they buy bonds or sell bonds? How does that make the interest rate go up? And you can use that price of bonds thing. So if the Fed buys bonds from the public, what's that do to the money supply? It goes up. What's the private bond supply do? Goes down. So the supply of something goes down, the price of bonds should go up, and the interest rate should go down. See how that works? Now, you know those two diagrams I drew? The vertical lines are shifting. The supply of money and the supply of bonds are shifting in opposite directions. With an open market operation. And then understand that the money supply depends upon this formula. And that when if banks hold more excess reserves, the multiplier goes down. And I didn't really explain this, but if people hold more currency, the multiplier goes down. You put the loan out, and the store owner says, you just gave them $90, you spent $100 at the store. The store owner says, oh, I need extra cash in my cash register, so he puts $10 in, only 90 makes its way to the bank. And so less would be lent out on the next week. It's another way for cash to leak out. So it can get stuck in the vault, or it can get stuck in your wallet, it can get stuck in a mattress or a cookie jar or a cash register. Otherwise, it finds its way back in and it gets reloaned. So you've got these two leakages from this process. One is currency holdings, and one is the vault. If there's either one of those leakages from that process of money creation goes up, the multiplier is going to go down. And that's really all it is going on. And then we'll come back to all this stuff later to sort of explain the financial crisis and all that sort of stuff.
What year are you
So I'm the Fed, and you have a bond, okay? So I say, here's $100, and you give me a bond. So now you have $100, and you take it and put it in your bank. The money supply just went up by the size of that whole paper, because that's the change in demand deposits. Just put it in the bank. So the open market operation was the size of this paper. The money supply just went up by the size of that paper. I get her, she gave me the bond, she put it in the bank. The bank says, okay, the reserve requirement's 10%, I gotta put that in the safe. When I loan that out, we go to your store, you don't want to hold any more currency than you're holding, so you put it all back in the bank. Now demand deposits just went up by that amount. And you take 10% of that, put it in the vault, the bank takes the rest and loans it to you. You go buy something at your store, you put it in demand deposits. So it keeps going around. Now I do it to you, loan it to you, you put it in his store. He says, I want to hold some in my cash register. Now the money supply goes up by even less than it would have because of the extra currency holding. Now the banks are holding not this much, they're required. It's a recession, so they're holding all kinds of excess reserves. Now the amount that circulates even smaller that comes back the next time, and the change in the money supply is even smaller. So this just keeps going on, currency getting leaked out of the pockets or wherever or not, back into the bank, required reserves, excess reserves if there's any. During good times, they don't hold excess reserves. And it keeps going until all of that money ends up as bank reserves. So the change in the bank reserves is the size of the paper. But the change in the money supply is much greater because of this process. And so currency holdings are a bigger rip, and reserves over and above what are required are bigger rip. So the apple goes around, you get a currency bite, a reserve bite, maybe an excess reserve bite, and you just keep counting how much of the apple's left over. And it gets smaller and smaller until that's what all that stuff up there was, just that piece of paper always seems big enough. You can also, give me 5 minutes here. There's also a federal funds market. So there's a supply of bank reserves. And that's what the Fed controls, is the supply of reserves. And there's a demand for bank reserves. This is required reserves, and you also hold reserves as insurance. If you think you have a bad loan out there, you need extra reserves to cover it. There's going to be a bunch of people taking their money out. You want to have extra reserves to help cover that. So the demand for reserves is a downward sloping thing. And so the federal funds rate, this is what the Fed actually targets, looks like this. Now, the way they control the federal funds rate then is just by changing the supply of reserves through open market operations. Now down here somewhere is a floor. The Fed actually pays interest on reserves right now. They pay 0.25%. So if a bank's got money in the vault, they get 0.25% on that money. What this market is, the federal funds market, is banks I have excess reserves, you have a shortage of reserves, you don't have as many as you want, I have too many, I'll loan you reserves overnight. This is the rate that banks loan each other reserves overnight. So it's the overnight rate on reserve borrowing and lending between banks. So it's a very short-term interest rate. It's overnight interest rate between banks. If you're getting paid 0.25%, would you ever loan at less than that? No, you wouldn't. You'd be dumb. Why loan it out at 0.2 when you can make 0.25 just putting it in the ball? So this is a floor. And right now it's around 0.25. There's also a ceiling. This is the discount rate. You can also borrow money from the Fed, what's called the discount rate. Why would you pay another bank more than what you could borrow from the Fed from? So that puts a ceiling on the federal funds rate. You'd never pay another bank more than the discount rate, because you should go to the Fed and borrow from them at that rate. What happened during the financial crisis is the Fed began lowering the federal funds rate. And that was normal open market operations. The federal funds rate did this fairly fast. So they increased bank reserves through open market operations. They dropped that federal fund. And that made H go up, but the money supply didn't change much because the multiplier fell. But anyway, don't worry about that one. So reserves kept going up. This is what you might think of as price easing, right? Prices are falling. The price of reserves is falling. They hit this point and they kept going. This is essentially the zero bound. It's actually around 0.25. If this wasn't there, you wouldn't go below zero anyway. So then they kept increasing the quantity of bank reserves. We're actually way out here right now on the flat part of the reserve demand curve. Banks are holding more than they want. And so this is called quantitative easing, because quantities are going up, but the price is the same. Here you can call it both. It's sort of price is going down and quantities going up. But at this point, it's purely the quantities are going up. And this has to work through a different mechanism, because this is mainly working through changes in the interest rate. Now it has to work through some other mechanism. And we can talk about that later. But that's all that's been going on in terms of when they talk about quantitative easing. You just push that on the flat part of the reserve demand curve. Now, there's two ways they could raise the federal funds rate. One is that if they wanted to unwind this, they could do a massive open market operation. Normal times, they were at about 700 million on their balance sheet. Right now, they're between 3 and 4 trillion. So this is about 5 times its normal size. So they could, in one couple of days or week, try to sell a couple $1 trillion worth of assets. So suppose inflation started threatening, and they need to raise interest rates. Well, in the old days, before they had the ability to pay interest on reserves, the only thing they could have done was do a massive open market operation. And they might be worried that's really going to destroy financial markets to dump $2 trillion worth of bonds on in a week. You don't know, that could just cause massive distortions and disruption in the market. But these days, what they can do is they can raise the amount they pay on reserves, put a new floor on there, and just keep raising. So when Bernanke gets asked about, are you worried about inflation? You can't possibly use open market operations to raise interest rates fast enough. He says, no, I'm not worried, because we have this new tool. Before the recession started, they couldn't pay interest on reserves. That was granted to them as a new tool. So if they want to raise the interest rate, they can leave the supply of bonds unchanged and simply raise the amount they pay on reserves. That's going to drive the federal funds rate up, even without an open market operation. So now they have two different tools to control the federal funds rate. They can change that floor, or they can change the quantities to the normal open market operations. I was just trying to fill 5 minutes to the break, because I didn't want to start a new section. So you don't have to know all this, but in case it's interesting, right? Toss it out. Reserve supply. That way? Oh, they moved this to open market. They changed the supply reserves to open market operations. They moved this in and out by to change the federal government. They changed this to open market operations. To get their interest rate target. So. So you're sitting at this federal funds rate, and you want a lower one, you can just increase the reserve supply and lower the commitment. Yeah, right. So the federal funds is the target. That is the target. That actually targets the federal funds. All interest rates move together. It's called the term structure. So the targeting the federal funds rate, we're able to move the whole structure. I get in trouble. But, you know, there can always be technical problems. There's a little thingy in the back that kind of bails people out the camera. So the cost is lower than it might otherwise be. I'll let you assess the benefit.
I will.
那一问，3问，第二题让我得的问，看情况，像我这种没写的知识的问。
Well, let's go again. So then I went way beyond what I planned and started talking there and couldn't help myself. So again, all we were talking about there is how the money supply is controlled. And they do that through open market operations, and it follows this formula, just the things I said you need to know. So what we have at this point is a goods market. It looks like this. It has a 45-degree line, has some expenditure function. What do we call this Z in this class? Z. So this is Y. This was C plus I plus G. And these are dependent on things. And that gave us equilibrium income. Then we had this other market, financial markets, where we have a money supply and a money demand curve. And all we were talking about a minute ago is how that's controlled. And again, mainly all we need to know is how it moves around for now through other market operations. So we have a financial market and a goods market. This gives us output, and this gives us an interest rate. So this market gives us a Y is given, Y is exogenous. So for here, P and Y are fixed. They're exogenous, and I is the endogenous variable. So in this market, we fix Y, we fix P, and it tells us what I is. You need to know M too. Investment really depends upon the interest rate, and we'll make that clear in a second. But we've been saying investment is just a constant. That's the same way as saying interest rates are constant. So we've essentially been saying with a fixed I and a fixed P, what is Y? So in this market, both of them fix P, but this one, if we give it a Y and a P, what's the I? In this one, it's the other way. If we give it a P and an I, what's the Y? What we're going to do next is put these together. See, we only have one equation, so we can only determine one unknown. We have one equilibrium condition, Y equals C plus I plus G. That's one equation, we can only determine one unknown. This is MD equals MS. That's one equation, we can only determine one unknown. And that's I here. Now we're going to put them together and simultaneously determine I and Y for a fixed P. Then we'll add another equation, an aggregate supply equation. We can do P, Y, and I all at once. We'll have three equations in our system, so we can determine three unknowns. You can never determine more variables than you have equations. X plus Y equals 1. Can you find X and Y uniquely? No. Because you got two unknowns in one equation. X plus Y equals 1, X minus Y equals 11. Yeah, I can figure that out. Two equations, two unknowns. So, we're going to put these together. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into something called an IS curve. And it's going to tell us, it'll look like this. And we'll do this, and it'll tell us how I and Y are related in the goods market. So what we're going to do is we're going to move I around and see how Y changes, and that'll map out a curve. We'll call that the IS curve for investment equals savings. That's the equilibrium. You could also call it a ZY curve, where Z equals Y. It's all the equilibrium pairs. Over here, we're going to get something called an LM curve. Again, it'll be I and Y. It'll be LM. L means money demand equals money supply. M equals the L thing. So this is money demand equals money supply. What we'll do here is we'll move Y around. When Y goes up, I goes up, right? If Y goes up, this shifts out. So I goes up. So it'll be a positive relationship between I and Y in this market. And that'll be the LM curve. Then we'll put those on one diagram, and where they cross will be the one pair of I and Y that's in equilibrium in both markets simultaneously. And that's what we're after here, is an equilibrium in both the goods and financial markets all at once. So the first thing we have to do is figure out what this IS curve is. Then we'll do the LM curve, then we'll put them together, and then we can do lots of fun things. Because we'll have a short-run model. We'll have a model of the economy that has pretty good explanatory power for any period of time when prices are relatively fixed. Because that's the assumption we're making, that prices are fixed. In the long run, we're going to need to bring in supply and all that because prices will change. But this is a pretty good short-run model. So we're building a short-run model of the economy. And the short run is defined as a period of time when prices are relatively constant. Okay, so let's build the IS curve first. Now, to do that, we have said that Z is C of Y minus T plus I bar plus G, T bar. We'll call it that for some reason. And then Z equals Y is the equilibrium. So this is the expenditure function, and that's the equilibrium. So to solve this, it's just Y equals C plus I plus G. So the equation of the IS is just Y equals C of Y minus T plus I. And I'm going to change this for a second, plus G. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an interest. Don't do that. So the equilibrium is just Y equals C of Y minus T plus I bar plus G. So that's where we are so far. And then in your homework, you figure out how to use this equation to find equilibrium and do all sorts of stuff. And hopefully, you know how to do that. Okay, now we want to generalize slightly. In reality, investment is some function of the interest rate and income. Negatively on the interest rate and positively on income. So what we've essentially been doing up here is just holding I fixed. This doesn't really go. We've been holding investment fixed and just ignoring this, actually. So now we want to generalize this a little bit. We've been throwing that out and holding that fixed. Why is it that when income goes up, investment goes up? Why would that be the case? If you're in a recession and you've got 4 factories and 2 of them are sitting idle, you're going to be building another one anytime soon. You've got 100 trucks and 30 are sitting on the lot doing nothing because there's nothing to deliver. You probably don't buy a lot of new plants and equipment. Probably not going to buy a lot of trucks. As you get closer to full employment, more and more firms are at capacity. They're using all their plants and equipment, using all their trucks and stuff. And so they're going to invest more in the future. And so you tend to see more investment as income gets higher. So as the economy gets better and better, the incentive to invest is higher and higher. So this is just saying, as the economy improves, there's more incentive to invest. One of the surprises in this recession, I think, is that business investment's actually been relatively strong. Now, this is both housing and, remember, housing is in here too. Housing totally collapsed during the recession and it hasn't really recovered that well. As the economy does better, it'll recover more. We'll see more investment. Business investment's actually been surprisingly strong in recent years, even though we've still been in a recession. What about the other case? Why is it that when the interest rate goes up, why is it that when the interest rate goes up, investment goes down? Why would that be? Well, suppose you take all of your investment projects. So here's the expected rate of return. I'm just making these up. And this is the size of the investment. So you're a firm, you have this one project, and you think, oh, I expect to make 14% on that. That's project A. Project B, I'm only going to make 12%. C, 11%. D, 8%. E, 4%. And so on. And maybe this is 1 million. This is a $2.5 million project. This is $500,000. And so on. I don't know. 2 million and 3 million. I don't know. I'm just making. If you had to pay 10% on your money, that's not only what you have to pay to borrow the money, that's what you can loan your money out for. It's the opportunity cost if you try to do this at a retainer. So you're a firm and you're thinking of investing. You can buy money at 10% and you expect to make 14%. So you're going to make 4% on every dollar. So you're going to invest $1 million for sure. So your investment would be 1 plus 2.5 plus 0.5. So we'd see investment out there of $3 million. And across all firms would be even more. Now suppose the interest rate falls to 7%. Now what happens? Suddenly more projects become profitable because the expected return doesn't change, but you're paying less for them. So now at 7%, suddenly D becomes feasible, and now investment would be 5 million in the economy. So as the interest rate falls, more and more investment projects become profitable. You expect to make money on them, and so you see investment going up. So you see a negative relationship between the interest rate and investment. So our more general model, this is the equilibrium, is y equals c and y minus t plus I of the interest rate of income plus g. And in this model, we give it a tax rate, we give it a government spending, we give it an interest rate. So we give it all this data, and it spits back a y to us. What we want to know is, if I give it a different interest rate, what y will it give me? As I keep feeding it different, what's the relationship between I and y? So the equilibrium is where these are equal. If I change this I, how does y have to change to keep this equal again? What's the endogenous response? So I'm going to keep feeding it different interest rates. I'll give it an I1. It'll give me a Y1. I'll give it an I2. It'll give me a Y2. I'll keep doing that for fixed T, fixed G, and so on. And that'll give me the IS curve. That'll tell me how I and Y are related, and that's what I want to do. Now so we can do it this way. We can still use the 45-degree line. So let me do two diagrams. So this is Y and Z. This is the 45-degree line diagram. This is still Z, C of Y minus T plus I of I0 Y plus G. And that gives me a Y0. So at I0, I get Y0. Okay? So I can find that down here. It's okay. Here's Y0, and here's I0. That's an equilibrium in the goods market. That's one point on our IS curve. Because the IS curve is all the equilibrium pairs I and Y. Now we can ask a question. Well, suppose I feed it a different interest rate and give this model a different interest rate. What happens to output? Well, as the interest rate goes down, what happens to investment? It goes up, that shifts this curve up. So what happens is this shifts up to C of y minus t plus I of I1 and y plus g. And that gives us a different level of output. Now I can keep feeding it all these different interest rates, and as I do it, it would map out all of the equilibrium pairs, I and Y, in the goods market. So this is every possible combination of I and Y that's an equilibrium in the goods market. So every one of those pairs is an equilibrium. Off the IS curve, we're not an equilibrium. We're somewhere else. But we're at just all these points. All these equilibrium points. So we just keep giving it different I's, shifting this thing around, and it'll map out all these points. And eventually we have the whole thing. So that's the IS curve. You could just, this is the equation of the IS curve. You could just calculate di dy. I won't ask you to do this, but if you wanted it, it's dy is c of y minus t times dy minus dt plus I of I di plus I of y dy plus dg. So that's the total derivative of the IS curve. We want to hold taxes constant, so dt is 0. We want to hold government spending constant, so dg is 0. If you solve this, you'll get that di dy is 1 minus c of y minus t plus I of y over I of I. So that's the partial of I with respect to investment with respect to interest rate. That's the partial of consumption with respect to disposable income. And that's how investment responds to income, the partial of I with respect to Y. This is negative down here. So if the top term is positive, we have a negative slope. This is the MPC right here. We know that's between 0 and 1, but we don't know that that total is between 0 and 1. So we have to assume that C of y minus t plus I of y is less than 1. We have to assume that those two responses are less than 1. That's what we're going to assume. So what that assumes is when income goes up by 1, aggregate demand goes up by less than 1. That's what we're assuming. So that's an assumption on the back of it. Under that assumption, this would happen. What happens is if that's not true, this thing has a perverse slope, it has a positive slope, and it just screws up the whole equilibrium. So in order for the slope of this thing to be less than 1, this is aggregate demand right here. The reason why this has a slope of 1, the reason why this is flatter is because we're assuming that when income goes up, this and this go up by less than 1. If these went up by more than 1, if that was bigger than 1, this would be steeper than the 45-degree line, and you'd have a model that just doesn't work. It would fall apart. So for reasons of stability, we have to assume that when y goes up by 1, so all this is saying is when y goes up, consumption goes up, and investment goes up. But this change is less than that. Some of it goes to savings, enough goes to savings that the full response is. So we're just assuming the MPC is small enough to make sure that's true, or this is small enough. And that's just a technical point on the line. But anyway, that's the IS curve. Let's think about what might cause a shift in the IS. Because we're heading to a model where we're going to have IS and LM together. We want to do things like this will depend on government spending and taxes. We're going to show now that when government spending goes up, this curve shifts out. And so this model predicts that income would go up and the interest rate would go up. So this will tell us what we can expect to happen if the gold price is fixed, the income and the interest rate, if we have an increase in government spending or cut in taxes. So now I need to show you how the IS moves around with these two policy variables. So we just want to show how the IS curve shifts in the case. So let's just take a given IS curve, IS of G0 or T0. Let's take a 45-degree line diagram. C of y minus t plus I, T0 plus I0 and y plus G0. So we're right here at I0, and the output level is Y0, same as that. Now I'm going to hold the interest rate constant and increase government spending. So keep I equals I0 and let G go up to G1. That's going to shift this 45-degree line up, right? So now we'll have C of y minus T0 plus I. We didn't change the interest rate, I0 and y plus G1. Because G went up, so it shifts that up. We did that before. Right? So now we have a higher equilibrium output. Has the interest rate changed? No, it's still I0. So this point, that's an equilibrium. So it has to be on the IS curve. So the IS curve has to go through that point. It must be if the IS curve shifted out as a result of that shift. What would be different if we had cut taxes instead of increasing government spending? I have T0 and T1 instead of G0 and G1, right? I could have just as easily done this by cutting taxes, where T1 is less than T0. Same diagram. In fact, anything that at a given level of the interest rate, anything that makes spending go up, would shift this up and shift the IS curve out. So the general result here is that anything that increases expenditures with the interest rate constant causes the IS curve to shift out. So they say, okay, suppose firms become more confident about the future. At a given interest rate, if they're more confident about the future, what's going to happen to investment? It should go up, right? And that would shift this curve up at the same interest rate. That's supposed to be horizontal. At the same interest rate, you'd have higher output because it shifted up. What if consumers had their expected future income go up? That's autonomous consumption. That's going to shift consumption up. So anything that shifts this line up at a given interest rate will shift the IS curve up. So all you have to ask yourself is, what does this do to spending? If I say, if I changes, what happens to the IS curve? You say nothing, that's a movement along the IS curve. But anything else, if, I don't know, anything that increases consumption or investment in government spending that's not I will cause the IS curve to shift up. So it's easy. Don't be so checking the right direction. There you come in and argue at the end. Way more. So the next section starts to get a little harder, and you like totally have these eyes look like I wouldn't be any place but right here, right now. This is boring. I hate it. So I'm going to do a numerical example. I'm just going to make one up that has for the IS curve and try to show you how it fits together. And it's sort of like the homework problem. So now let's try to do something a little more active with no new material. It's sort of one of those numerical examples. So before we were saying things like, let's C equal, like, 300 plus, I don't know, 3/4 times y minus t, right? So there's our consumption. Let t be 200. G is 100. And before, we would just say I equals 500, something like that. Now what we have to do is make investment dependent upon income and the interest rate. So we might say investment equals 400 minus 2i plus 1/8 of what? I need those two things to be less than 1 to add up. This is C of y minus t, and this is I of y in what I just did. So I need those two things to be less than 1. So find the equation of the IS curve. Find the relationship between I and y. So all we've done is take the model we've been using so far and make investment a function of income and the interest rate. So it depends negatively on the interest rate and positively on income. And that's probably way too small a number to be realistic, but we'll work. This is just a model. So how would I find, what's the equation of the IS curve? What's the equilibrium? So I need, it's y equals c plus I plus g, right? So I just need to sub in all those things. So the equation of the IS curve would be like y equals, what's c? 300 plus 3/4 of y minus 2. 200, right? Plus, what's I? 400 minus 2I plus 1/8 y. C plus I plus G is 100. Now I have a relationship between y and I. That's the IS curve. Now I can put it in slope-intercept form by doing what? Solving for what's on the left-hand side axis, what's y, what's the I. So I just solve this for I, and I'll have an equation of, this is the equation of the IS curve. If I solve this for I, I'll have the equation of the IS curve in slope-intercept form. Right? So what would you do? Move that to that side. 2I equals what? 300 plus 3/4 of y minus 200 plus 400 plus 1/8 y plus 100. With me? Minus y. And see, we've got a 3/4 and a 1/8 here, and a minus 1 here. We're going to get a negative slope. C of y minus t plus I of y is going to have to be less than 1. That's that thing I was talking about earlier. This tells us when aggregate, this side's aggregate demand. When aggregate, when y goes up by 1, aggregate demand goes up by 3/4 plus 1/8. It goes up by less than 1. And that's that restriction we were talking about that makes the IS curve, makes the expenditure function have a flatter than 1 slope. So now, 2I equals, I don't know, 700, 800, right? Minus, what is that? 150? This number's going to come out okay. Plus 3/4 plus 1/8 minus 1 times y. And again, this is what I call C. I don't know if you want to write this, if you get the calculus. Those are the C of y minus t and I of y terms. Those have to be less than 1 when you add them up to make sure you have a negative slope. So I is that 325, 400 minus 75. 650 over 2. Do it your way. Plus minus 1/16 of y. This is, I do it, let's see, 7/8. And then I get a half coming through, so it makes it 1/16. But it's a negative slope because those are less than 1. So this would be our IS curve. So the IS curve for this model just looks like that's 325. And it has a slope minus 1/16. But I totally just made this up. I don't have it in my notes or anything. What was government spending? I erased it.
100.
100? What's taxes?
200.
We got money to spend. So, let's increase government spending by 100. So let G go up. What's that going to change here? This number would change to 900. Now I'm dividing by 2. So what's the new intercept going to be? Yes. So you'll have the same slope, but now it'll be 375. Because we divide by 2 when we bring this through. So this would now be 900 when you add those up. You with me on that? So your problems in your homework are doing this stuff. So this is all of the autonomous things just like before. It's got taxes in it. It's got all these constants in the consumption. That's autonomous consumption. That's in the intercept. We've got autonomous investment. Because investment was like, what was it? What was the constant of the investment? 400? That's autonomous investment. That's including all the other things that are in our model. That's in here. All those things are in here. All those constants. If any of those things change, it's going to shift the IS curve over. So we just took the model we had, we made investment a function of income, so now we have a relationship between I and Y, and it looks like this. This seemed to help. Didn't think it would, but I did that. And what I'll do next time, and it sort of shows you here, the investment functions, the slope of the IS curves would depend upon I of Y. And this number here, this is what I call I of I. That's the response of investment. So remember we said that the slope of the IS curve, let me just do this. We said the slope of the IS is 1 minus, it's the other way around. Yeah, no, 1 minus C of Y minus T plus I of Y over I of I. In this model, this number is 3/4. This number here is 1/8. And this number here is 2. So the I of I in this model is just 2. And so the slope is 1 minus 7/8, 1/8 over, and I've got this backwards, over, this is a minus 2. Sorry. This is, in the investment function, the I of I is a minus 2. That's minus I of I. The investment is 400 minus 2I. That minus 2 is the response of investment to the interest rate. That's I of I. I of I is how big I responds when little I changes. The response to investment to the interest rate. So this slope formula, that's where all the numbers in the linear model would fit in. So this becomes minus 1/16. Minus 2, and that's 1. And so long as these numbers are less than 1 when you add them up, the IS curves, this will be negative. As long as this is positive, as long as those are less than 1, you'll have a negatively sloped IS curve. Okay, well, I guess it won't kill me if I let you out 5 minutes early. As hard as it is for me to do, I'm just feeling so sorry for what is on your faces. Okay, we'll do more of this next time. You're going to love it.